If you'd spoken to me in the last year or two about electric vehicles, I might have told you how great they are to drive, how cheap they can be to run, how if you do enough miles in them, you're probably going to be working out cheaper than a fossil fuel powered car. But I'd probably also have told you how expensive they are to buy. I'd probably use the excuse that they're really expensive because there isn't a second-hand electric vehicle market yet. Well, Tom Bray, what do you call this if there isn't a second-hand electric vehicle market yet? So this is the classic and electric vehicle showroom about 250 metres away from my home, and this is a story about how my best mates proved me wrong and bought a second-hand electric vehicle. My name is Tom, and this is a little series about a low carbon lifestyle. Okay, so welcome back to Low Carbon Lifestyle. I'd like to introduce you to my good friends Mim and Sam. Outside of COVID times, I'd be seeing these two maybe 3 or 4 times a week. I lived with Mim for more or less 5 years, and I've known Sam for about 12 and a half years. They are very talented heroes who spend their time helping other people. Sam's a musician, a campaigner, a friend of asylum seekers, and a campaigner for asylum seekers, and a railway enthusiast. Mim is an author, check out Jailbird's paperback out now, the co-founder of Refused Cafe, where we did the video with Nikki, a support worker, a sustainable fashionista, and an all-round world changer. A few weeks ago, their 12-year-old Toyota Yaris broke down, and it was going to cost much more than it was worth to get going again. And despite the nostalgia, they decided it was time to change. At first they thought they might get a replacement, like for like, but Sam's mum and dad had just got an electric car, so their interest in EVs was piqued. And during a socially distanced walk with me, where I did my spiel about how unaffordable but great electric cars are, Sam and I walked past the classic and electric vehicle dealership in Neville's Cross. Without much more thought, Sam and Mim decided to go and say hello. Could they get an almost affordable electric car that would meet all their needs and avoid needing to buy another petrol car, as well as reducing their emissions? Could they really do it? To be honest, I think I was doubtful, but I was really supportive in them going for it. Okay, so now I'm sat here with Sam on a beautiful, freezing April afternoon. What the heck has happened to the weather? Climate change, who knows? But yeah, so Sam, why don't you fill in the gaps for us? You were driving an old Toyota Yaris, but tell us a little bit about that.
So the Yaris that we were driving was a 2009 Yaris, second hand. Got it in 2014, and it was fantastic. It was a great little car, but it was gradually. I loved it. It was my first car, and I think you're always attached to your first car. But it was just gradually, just sort of falling apart, to be honest. So we thought we could push it for a couple more years, just running it. You know, it had 130,000 miles on it.
Okay. Wow.
And so it was getting on a bit. But Yaris is a good make. It wasn't too bad. I mean, every year the service and the MOT would gradually become more and more expensive.
Yeah.
You know, a few £100, £300 or £400 sometimes, and it just got to the point where actually it was getting expensive to run, and we thought we had 2 more years left on the window of having this car before we'd look at getting a new car. But then that suddenly came crashing down within like 2 weeks. So within 2 weeks we had 3 call-outs from the roadside recovery, which were fantastic. You know, every time they responded. But at that point we thought, it's getting worse, and the clutch went, and that was a £700.
Wow. Okay.
Cost to fix. And this is just after replacing the exhaust on the old car, 200 quid.
Yeah.
You know, it's not.
It's
the car wasn't worth at that point any more than £1,000.
Yeah. Well, so you needed a new car. What kind of driving did you do in that old car? So what was your normal week look like? How many miles, that kind of thing? Yeah,
so we would do probably about 100 miles a week, maybe 200 miles, like averaging around that. Mim would go off, so my wife would go off to the cafe. That would be, a round trip of 10 miles times 5, that's 50.
Yeah.
And then we'd do, the odd trip to the beach, maybe a trip to the supermarket.
Sure.
But then, of course, we'd also do quite long distant journeys throughout the year. So altogether, we were racking up about 10,000 miles.
Okay.
Which
so
felt
the occasional
ridiculous.
trip down south to the south coast or to
that's
London, and sometimes driving away kind of regionally as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Brill.
So yeah.
This was a car you'd had for 7-8 years. You loved it. You wanted to keep it going. You were trying to eke it out, but it kept on costing to repair.
Yeah.
It did the job, but that's fine. So I guess about 6 or 7 weeks ago, you were kind of like, this is too much. We need to start again. We need a more reliable car. And you went to say hello to George over at the Classic and Electric Vehicle showroom.
That's right, yeah.
What did you find there? Tell us about George. Tell us about that.
Well, so George was a recommendation from the man himself, Tom.
I've never met George except via Teams, but one day I will meet George. Yeah.
And he was very approachable. And his passion is basically people like myself who are first-time buyers. He wants to switch people who are petrol buyers to electric. And I kind of thought that, you had to be either very geeky or very affluent maybe to afford an electric car. Yeah. But actually that isn't the case, because the second-hand market is coming, the prices are coming down. And he basically, we said to him, look, we've got a budget in mind. We don't think we can afford more than sort of, an 80-mile range. I think that's what we went for at the time. Yeah. So we kind of showed him our criteria, and he kind of talked us through the options. And he was definitely very much, at the end of the day, he's a car salesman, and he knows that. But he did a brilliant job of persuading us.
Okay.
And it wasn't just George. George introduced us to this whole community of electric vehicle owners. Yeah. And the more you read about it, the more you listen to the podcasts, the more you realise there is this growing community of people who are really passionate, and you can just see the industry kind of booming. Yeah. And that's the exciting thing, that this is an industry that's going to grow and it's going to fill our lives, because eventually we're going to have to go electric.
So you said you could only afford an 80-mile car because you thought that was a price limit, but what have you ended up with, and what did you find from George?
Yeah, so we've ended up with a 500-mile range. No, joking. We've ended up with we pushed it up to 115, which on reflection,
interrupted by the puppy.
So yeah, we were looking at, so we thought 80 because we just sort of saw the prices of so we're talking maybe $5,000, $6,000 for an 80-mile second-hand electric car. Okay. And giving it a lot of thought as well, we thought, well, is that going to be enough? Because realistically, 80-mile range is probably 60 in the winter.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's a trip to the beach and back, and then you're stuck.
Yeah.
And so we thought about it and thought, well, maybe we need a slightly larger range. So we actually went for a 115 range, which is
okay.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about that later.
Sure.
It's not all it cracks up to be, but it's a lifestyle. It's a mindset thing.
So you mentioned kind of range in winter compared to range in summer, and we're on a really cold day today, so I guess that suggests to me that the car's less efficient, the battery's not working as well, and you're going to have a lower range today on a cold day than you might do when it's in a couple months' time, when it's 20 degrees outside. So and that's something that you've experienced already in terms of the range being a bit less than what you might expect it to be.
Yes, definitely. So I think it's 20%, they say, 20% of the battery's full capacity. Just on winter alone. Okay. But then there's all the factors. There's the relief of the road. Sure. There's the way you drive. Yeah. If you're accelerating and braking, well, braking's okay, but if you're accelerating and putting pressure on the battery, that just drains it. Sure. And already within 6 weeks, I'm driving differently than I was 6 weeks ago. Okay. Really differently.
How different? Why are you driving differently?
Well, it's so ironic, isn't it? Because really everyone on the road should be driving really efficiently. Sure. Because of the environment. But actually, I'm driving really efficiently because I know that my battery life is very limited. And you just don't want to be caught out. And I have been caught out, and I'll confess that on your show, Tom. I'll be the first to confess it.
You were sort of like 300 metres away from a charger.
I was so close. Oh, no. And part of me, it was a Saturday. I had time on my hands. I thought, well, if it's going to happen, today isn't a bad time for it to happen, to experience what actually happens. Sure. And I can tell you that it's not like a petrol car where you think you've got 20 miles spare. You haven't. It just, when the battery goes, and then you're stranded. But it's good to kind of do it safely. Where I was close to, I was on a large wide open road, and I knew I could just pull over. Sure. It was slow moving traffic. It was fine.
So tell us about the positives of the car then. Do you enjoy driving the car? How's it different to the Yaris? Is there anything? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's very, very quiet. I mean, you know that if you're by the side of the road, but it's really smooth. There's no jerks, and So smooth.
Okay.
Smooth, it's quiet. I think it's just the mindset when you drive this car. You're thinking in a completely different way. You're thinking about energy efficiency all of a sudden.
Okay, right.
And there's no desire to drive at 70 on the motorway. Like,
okay,
it's really
right.
interesting. Like,
right.
I'm sitting there on cruise control at 60,
yeah.
but just like lining up behind the lorries, and life just slows down, and it's okay. I suppose also the conscious thing. You know, you're driving around thinking, this journey might have been unnecessary, but what does it cost me? And what does it cost the environment? Very little compared to, you know, once you bought the car, that's the key. You know, that's the key kind of cost in terms of the environment. And
it does do everything you need to do. So whether it's your weekly stuff, maybe driving to Chester Street and back, or whether it's going to the shops, or as you say, going to the beach, or at some point going to see friends, whatever it be, it does those basic journeys that you need it to do. And you can make the longer journeys work using rapid chargers in the public. I'm conscious you've not got a charger at your home yet.
Not yet.
But that's in process, hopefully.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a charger installed at home?
Yeah, so there's complications because we need the electricity de-looped, because it's currently, you're not allowed to have the charging point if your house is looped to the house next door, which is quite common. So that's something to look out for. And we also might need a wall repointing.
Okay.
But to be honest, Durham is so blessed with like electric charge points everywhere.
Right.
We're never more than like, you know, sort of half a mile away from a really decent rapid charge.
Okay.
And the money's just so, you know, like you pay £4 for a full tank. It's only 100 miles.
Sure.
So actually, it's not, you know, like it's, before you might have been paying 50 quid for 350 miles.
Sure, yeah.
So it's definitely less.
I'll definitely go into the maths on that in a moment. Back at home, because I think there's a really good comparison to make, just basic fuel savings in terms of how much you could charge a car up for on a public network compared to a petrol station. You know, but then the interesting thing that I think you guys are looking into is this a smart charger where you're going to have a time of use tariff to charge overnight. And I feel like, and I'll go into maths again on that as well. But the cost per mile to drive this thing, before we think about the maintenance, the MOT potential costs, the road tax, etc., that you might have from a petrol or diesel car, just the saving on fuel is so much. So how old's this car?
This is 2015.
So 2015. So about 6 years old.
So it's 6 years old. It actually had 51,000 miles on it, which is quite a lot for a second-hand car of this kind. But it's been well looked after.
Sure.
The battery engine rating is 12 out of 12.
Okay.
Which is a key thing to look out for. It's been looked after well. There's a the former driver was a Sunderland Nissan worker.
Okay, right.
He knew how to look after the car. And we actually bumped into him randomly, and he rates it really highly.
Because that's a similar. Our car's a 2014 car, so a year older. We've done about 70,000 miles in our car, so I think there's a really good comparison to make. A Nissan Pulsar versus the Nissan Leaf in terms of price to buy and price to run. So I think that'll be really good to go into. So is there anything that you'd want differently about this car? Anything you'd improve other than maybe range, I guess? Is there anything you change?
So I think the range is really interesting, because you don't know until you actually, you know, you can think about it when you're deciding whether to buy a car. You think, I'll be fine, it'll be novel, and then actually after 6 weeks of being in the car, you are much more conscious of where you're going. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think because there's this reassurance that you know that the network will only increase, and that, like you go and visit a friend and you plug in. You go and have some, go and have coffee, and you plug in, you go and have lunch. So every time we stop, we'll now be plugging in eventually.
Okay.
We're not there yet, so you have to be much more strategic. But I love planning a journey. I love like the idea of where am I going to get to, like, and when it works, it's the best feeling. Like pull into services, plug in, go and have a coffee, have a loo break, come back. Oh, it's finished. Rapid charge is about half an hour.
Okay, right.
Which is what you do anyway if you're doing a long journey.
Yeah, and I guess if you're saying you're going to get 70-80 miles on a motorway, then maybe you'd want to do, that's probably an hour and a half drive, maybe a little bit less than that. You might want to do a bit further before you stop each time.
Yeah, you'd rather do like 100 miles and stop, whereas on a motorway, you have to do 60 really to get the most out of this.
Okay.
But again, that's no bad thing.
Sure.
Like, if nothing else, you're encouraging other drivers around you to slow down a little bit. Because, I'm guilty of, in a petrol car, driving at 70, 75, keeping up with the traffic.
Sure.
It's all an illusion, though. You don't need to keep up with the traffic. Like, you are the traffic.
You just take your time and bimble down the road.
You're the traffic, and actually sitting behind a lorry at 60 is no bad thing. Like, there's just more space, I think, and
Okay, yeah, nice.
more space to think, and you're not kind of forced into this trap, this modern capitalist trap of like always needing to be productive and going somewhere. So I think even on that grounds, it's...
And so how do you plan your journeys? If you know you're going to a certain place, how are you going to plan to charge in that?
Yeah, so you need to know what you're on. So say most days it's fully charged anyway, because we charge at the cafe. So the other day I did a journey, and it was about an hour away on the motorway.
Okay.
And I knew I needed one charge because of the miles I had left. So you've got on the tank, you've got your miles remaining and your battery, but don't be fooled by the miles remaining, because whatever journey you're about to do, it could be different to what it's telling you. So you have to. There's a lot of maths going on. You're kind of thinking about, like, okay, what's the road surface like? Is it hilly? Am I going up to the Dales? Am I, going down to the sea? Because that makes a difference.
Sure. Yeah.
And then just looking at Zap Map, fantastic app.
Great.
And you're looking at like your charge points, and I'm usually looking for a rapid one because I haven't usually got time to sort of wait 4 hours for a full charge. So I'm looking for a half an hour charge, ideally somewhere near a convenience shop or a McDonald's or something, and then just like looking up the route.
Sure.
Always thinking of plan B. So where are you going to go if that one doesn't work or it's out of action? It's not happened yet, but it's they tell you that don't bank on the fact that there's the one charge place you're going to drain the battery right down to just to get to, because if you need to then like
go
your
5 miles
contingency
more.
plan, exactly, you won't have any left if you haven't thought about plan B.
Okay.
So I'm trying to not go below 20 miles in the tank.
Okay. And I think the thing is when you've got a charger at home, you'll be waking up to a full tank, a full battery every morning, which is a completely different way of thinking compared to a petrol car. So I went to a site visit for work this morning in our car, and we had no miles left on the battery kind of thing. It said we had no petrol yet. So it's like, okay, so I've got to factor in another 5-minute stop to fill up the car and to go past all the junk food in the petrol station. Whereas actually, if you had an electric car, it would have been okay. It's ready to go straight away. So anyway, I guess there's both and, isn't there, with the waiting to charge at certain places, but also not having to ever visit a petrol station again could be quite nice. I think Sam and Mim almost proved me wrong in terms of you can get a second-hand electric car, you can get it so it's affordable, and you probably could get it so that in 3 or 4 years' time you're paying less overall than you would be a petrol car. So I'm well impressed, I'm well inspired. Still not sure we're quite going to get a new car just yet, because we do so few miles and we don't really need it, but maybe in the next 12 months I'll be visiting George as well and saying, can I have a new Nissan Leaf please, or a second-hand Nissan Leaf please. So we were just chatting and our friend Amy came for a social distance walk with Esther, my wife, and she was like, I can't believe you're just talking about electric cars. I'm thinking of leasing an electric car. Amazing.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
So what are you looking at? Have you looked at any yet?
I've tried to look at some, but I really haven't got anywhere online. So any tips would be
Right,
helpful.
we'll do
How
this.
do you even start?
Maybe we'll do a video. This will be the 4th video in the transport series about where do you even start with electric vehicles.
Yeah.
So we'll get back in touch with you in about a week's time.
And also for people in their early to mid-20s.
Early to mid-20s.
The young professionals.
You're not early to mid-20s. You're mid-20s. Well, okay, so episode 4 in the transport series. We did one on cars. We're doing a second one with Sam on second-hand electric vehicles. The third one is on hiring them, short-term hire, because we hired one and went on a road trip. And then the 4th one
With me.
will be with Amy.
Okay, back in the house with some of the maths for you. So this Nissan Leaf has a battery of about 30 kilowatt hours in size, and it does about 3 or 4 miles per kilowatt hour depending on how you drive it, what mode you have it on, and what the temperature is. And as Sam was saying, it has a range of between 90 and 120 miles, which is fairly significant. That's a lot of driving, like 2 or 3 hours minimum driving. As we talked about outside, Mim and Sam are in the process of getting an EV charge point installed at home. And they're currently on a tariff with Bulb. Fantastic, 100% renewable, so well done, good start. And Bulb charges them about 16 pence per kilowatt hour. So to fill up that 30 kilowatt hour battery tank at that rate of electricity, it would cost just under £5. And then it would do about 120 miles. So that's less than 5p a mile. That's really not bad. So my car, parked outside, which is a similar age, it's done a similar amount of miles, and is actually also a Nissan, does about 15 miles to the gallon of petrol. So that would cost about 11 pence per mile just on fuel. And we're not considering the road tax or other issues that a fossil fuel car might have that an EV wouldn't. So if Mim and Sam did 10,000 miles per year, they would be saving £600 versus us just on fuel. That's quite interesting. In fact, Mim and Sam are going to get a charge point installed that is smart. It's so smart that it can be programmed to only charge at certain times of the day. And it just so happens that Bulb are about to release an EV specific tariff, and Octopus and others do this too, that would cost just 4 pence per kilowatt hour during the night. If the Leaf can do 4 miles per kilowatt hour and the electricity costs just 4 pence per kilowatt hour, can you do the maths for that one? So this would cost about 1 pence per mile to run. That would be £1,000 saving per year just on fuel. Even better than that, there are still some free charges at certain places around town, I guess. So places like supermarkets or restaurants that are using charging to try and attract customers. Those places you'd top up a full tank completely free without any cost whilst you did your shopping or whilst you went for dinner. So let's have a look online about whether we, Tom and Esther, could do something similar and compare a second-hand Nissan Pulsar like ours with a second-hand Nissan Leaf like Mim and Sam's. So I did some ecosiering instead of Googling. I found the Nissan Pulsar page on Auto Trader. From what I can tell online, our Nissan Pulsar would cost about £6,000-7,000 to buy in its current state. So what about a Nissan Leaf? Again, finding the site on Auto Trader, we could buy a Nissan Leaf, a similar age to our Pulsar, with less miles, but the same battery capacity as Mim and Sam's, for about £9,000. So on top of that, if a charge point at home costs about £500, the difference in cost between the Pulsar and the Leaf would be £3,500. And based on the cost to fuel the Leaf, Mim and Sam would be saving in about 2.5-3 years compared to our costs. So now, if you ask me about electric vehicles, I might say something a little different. I might say you can buy a second-hand electric vehicle for a fairly reasonable price that would do everything you need it to do and would work out cheaper than a petrol or diesel equivalent in 3 or 4 years' time. And that's without considering the emissions tax that fossil fuel vehicles might have, and without considering things that can't go wrong with an EV that could go wrong with a petrol car. With zero emissions from the car itself, doing so much less damage to the air quality of your community, and as Sam said, driving like a charm. And just to be clear though, and I've said this before, but an electric vehicle is not zero emissions. An EV charged on a bulb tariff is pretty close to zero. But if we assume the average carbon intensity of the grid, and Mim and Sam will actually be charging mostly overnight, so the intensity tends to be lower overnight, but every kilowatt hour will release about 230 grams of CO2. So this car emits at worst about 58 grams of CO2 per mile, compared to about 200-250 grams of CO2 per mile in my Nissan Pulsar. So the Leaf is at least 70% less emissions than the Pulsar. And that's me being pretty unfair, really. So Mim and Sam have proved to me that this is a really reasonable step, and maybe a step that more of us could take, particularly as the second-hand market gets stronger and stronger. But it's already there, we could already do it today. So why don't we just do it? Next time you need to replace a car, yeah, get a part exchange on your old car, but why don't you look at a Nissan Leaf or a Renault Zoe or the plethora of different second-hand vehicles that you'll find on the market in the next 2 or 3 years. But maybe you don't want to own a car at all, but you still might want to use a car for a long distance journey or just for fun at the weekend. In the next video I'm going to look at where we could hire electric vehicles from and whether that's a decision we could make. And finally, as our mate Amy said, she's looking at leasing an electric vehicle. Where do you even start with that? So in my 4th video on the car/transport series of Low Carbon Lifestyle, we're going to look at how we lease electric vehicles. I hope that's been a helpful video. I hope that's kind of shown, that's kind of proved to you that we don't have to be reliant on fossil fuels to get around. If you enjoyed that, please do subscribe to this channel for more content about a low carbon lifestyle and low carbon futures. And I'd love to hear from you, so please do comment below at the kind of car that you might buy next.